Last call for cubes.
That's right. Hello, everyone. How are you? Hope everybody's enjoying the conference. I just want to say anybody who is on the S&T faculty or staff, you guys are doing a great job. It's a fantastic thing that's done every year, so kudos to everyone involved. My name is Tim Toennies. I am a SQL Server DBA and Business Intelligence Architect at SLU. I have been at SLU for a couple of years. This discussion is going to be kind of 100, 200 level. We're going to talk a little bit about business intelligence and reporting options when you have a Microsoft SQL Server Analysis Services data source. A lot of this applies to kind of any other data source. So a lot of these same kinds of ideas are relevant if you have any kind of database. So Oracle, Teradata, SQL Server, reporting services, and Excel that I'm going to be touching on are a very broad platform for reporting, so you can really report on this data from almost any kind of structured, and Microsoft is kind of evolving to an unstructured platform. But specifically today, it's going to be against an analysis services queue. The other thing that I want to mention is that a lot of the heavy lifting in these kinds of projects isn't the reporting piece. A lot of the heavy lifting is really getting the data and then structuring the data in a cube and building a cube. When I was doing consulting and ran these kind of projects, we would tend to break out the work in kind of a 40%, 40%, 20% kind of overhead kind of framework, where 40% is the ETL and getting the data, 40% is designing the cube and building the cube, and then 20% is the reports. So this is kind of the easy end of projects of this type. So if you have questions about the other pieces of this that I'm not going to touch on, if you want more information about analysis services or about kind of building the data mart that's sort of the foundation for an analysis services cube, please ask questions. We can talk offline. Send me an email. I'd be glad to offer some tips and tricks and suggestions for how to further your knowledge in those areas, okay? But we're going to first talk about SQL Server reporting services, what it is, what it does, then analysis services a little bit, okay? We're going to talk on then the differences between Excel and SSRS. When would I suggest to my users that they should use Excel? What are some reasons, or maybe more importantly, what is the skill set that they probably need to have to be better aligned to use Excel as a reporting platform? When is it more appropriate to use reporting services as a reporting platform? What things have to be in place? I'm going to show some example reports, both in terms of the design interface as well as the consumption or the end user interface and what they look like. There are a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap in the two reporting environments. There are some things that are unique, and in general, there are some areas where you would kind of say, if this, then pick this tool, or if this, then pick that tool, and I'll try to go over that. But there is a lot of overlap, okay? And then eventually get into what are some things that we want to look for in research? Why would one want to use one tool in research versus another? And we'll talk about that a little bit. So let's start a little bit with the strengths of Excel. In general, at this time, if you kind of follow what Microsoft is doing in terms of providing technologies, really Microsoft people, basically what they're saying is that the vast majority of reporting really is going to lead to Excel. Excel has always been probably the most popular analysis tool. Finance people, analysts, data integration people tend to start with Excel. Microsoft has recognized this, so they are tending to add functionality to Microsoft Excel to keep up, to give people different options. One of the slides I have at the end is that there's a couple of new technologies that Microsoft has added called Power Pivot and Power Query that are in Excel, and I'll talk a little bit about them at the end to kind of touch on kind of the newest state-of-the-art that Microsoft is doing in that space. Excel is very versatile. You can have data analysis charts, you can have graphs, you can have connections to a lot of different interfaces, both, as I said, structured. They are integrating it with a lot of their Hadoop environment. Microsoft is partnering with Hortonworks to create access to unstructured data in the, I will affectionately call big data space, big data being very relative, but anyway, that's kind of a label. So Excel is by and large the tool that they're using to get access to that space. They have tons of add-ins, as I said, Power Pivot, Power Query. There's a lot of pivot tables that people have been using since Excel 2003, and that is continuing to be added to in Excel. And it really is geared for heavy analysts, people who need to do hardcore number crunching, but it still remains a very easy to use tool for a lot of people to get up and running and be successful on. SSRS is kind of a classic report consumption environment. SQL Server Reporting Services competes with Cognos, they compete with WebFocus. All of those platforms are very good. All of those platforms really work very well, and they're all web-based access. So it's a very easily accessible reporting tool for people who want to view reports. One of the downsides, though, of reporting services, or really any tool like that, is you need to have some subject matter expertise in creating reports. You really almost need to be a BI developer. It really isn't kind of a tool that an analyst is going to pick up and create a report. So you need to have some experience in understanding how to build that report in the first place. So there is some expertise that you need to have. And as I said, it really is geared for a consumer-based end user. So get a requirement, build the report, create it, deliver it back to the consumer. They look at it in a web model. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do to export it. You know, almost all the platforms have the ability to export it to a PDF or an image or back out to Excel. It's always funny to me that everything is always made to get back into Excel. So I think Microsoft, you know, like 5 years ago, finally realized that, well, why don't I just make it really easy to get to Excel in the first place? So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these things being added directly to Excel, so you can kind of bypass this middleman and get this data right out of the database or the cube in the first place. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about Excel. So this is a report that we use at SLU for determining our allocation for IT staff and their reporting time. So this has a lot of the new stuff that Microsoft is adding to Excel. These things on top are called slicers. So a slicer is basically just something that you can filter by. You can filter by different things that you choose that are based on the data set that you're retrieving. In this case, this is a data set out of analysis services. So all these filters, all these slicers come right out of dimensions in the cube. And that's one thing I'll talk about with cubes in SQL Server Analysis Services. So Analysis Services fundamentally has two different types of storage elements. There are measures, which are basically numbers. So in this case, I'm getting numbers of people's hours. So the number is exactly that, hours. And then there are dimensions. Dimensions describe the numbers. So they are effectively the adjectives. They are the what, they are the where, they are always in the cube the when. So it's people, departments, projects, time, and then you can do calculations on the measures. So now that I know my hours, right, now I can figure out my overtime hours. I can figure out how many hours, say, below the minimum number of hours that I need for a week. I can then figure out my percentage allocation. So if I'm supposed to work 40 hours a week and I've worked 75, which fortunately never happens at SLU, thank God. Say I work 45, I can figure out what percentage of overtime I'm working, right? So, and it has the ability to create those calculations, which are called custom measures in the cube. So fundamentally, Analysis Services stores dimensional data and fact-based data called measures, okay? And as the designer of the cube, that's kind of one thing that you work through, which is really, again, that's one of those things that's a bit outside the scope of this topic. But again, if you have questions about kind of how you do that, please let me know, okay? So again, this is a sample of something coming out of Excel. Oh, that is a horrible, wow. So this is intended to be, yeah, can someone get the lights maybe? Maybe that'll help. Well, try it again. Yeah, down more. Again. No. So this is intended to show you that this is really a drag and drop interface. All of this, oh, that's better. So all of these items are selectable in a designer in Excel. These are all different options from a pivot table. All of these items are available in the cube. So this is just something that can be selected and put onto the cube, onto the design pane in Excel, so you can get access to these numbers. On the left are all the dimensions. So again, I've got dimensions on date. I've got additional fields, so I can do calculations based on months, weeks, quarters, year. That'll roll up into what is called a hierarchy. Then I've got calculations on department. So at SLU, we break things down into a department level, and we have a parent department, and we have a division. And all those things roll up. Now the nice thing about the cube is that all those numbers are pre-aggregated. All those calculations are saved in the cube. So if I want to see things at a division level, and I drop that onto the design interface, I have that number. If I can expand, when I click, there's a little plus sign there. When I click that, I can then see the detail at the parent department level. I click again and I can see the detail at the department level, and then finally to the employee level. All those calculations are saved. I don't have to recreate a query. I don't have to change my group by, if all of you are developer, DBAs or developers. All that aggregation is saved in the cube, so I have immediate access to it. And that works the same way for date hierarchies. So if I want to know year, quarter, month, and day, all that's saved in there as well. Okay. So that's really the power of the cube, is saving and storing all those aggregations. Now, you as the designer have to kind of build that in. You have to put that in place so your users can use it, but it's not that difficult. There's a lot of repeatable techniques that you can use. Okay. So this then is a chart based on in Excel. So this is a very simple bar chart that shows allocation over the quarters, totals of hours over the year. I've got two line graphs showing total hours and overtime hours. Again, Excel has a very broad palette of charts that you can use. Any kind of chart that you can make. I actually think now in 2013 they have integrated Bing Maps as well. So you have access to mapping technologies within Excel. That was something that was in reporting services for a long time. I think they brought that over into Excel as well now. Okay? So a lot of charts, the classic range, bar charts, pie charts, line charts, heat maps that they have available to you, as well as now geographic data that you can integrate into Excel from structured data source. Okay? So now we'll move on a little bit to reporting services. This is the designer interface in reporting services. Reporting services is effectively, it takes some templates and it integrates that into the development environment of Visual Studio. So if you're a developer in Visual Studio and you write applications using C#, using Visual Basic, PHP, it integrates into Visual Studio, this is going to look very, very similar to you. This is just another set of templates that are added into Visual Studio to allow you to create reports against your structured data source. So frankly, it's very interesting to me that it's a lot easier for a developer to become, in this case, a BI developer than a DBA to be a BI developer because of the tools. The tools are completely built around Visual Studio, and it's a very, very similar interface for people to use. All of these templates on the right are already in Visual Studio in terms of the solution, the project, the properties, and then on the left are all these tools that can be available to you as a developer. So you can pick, again, your chart type, your data source, your data sets, things like that. This, then, is the Query Designer. So in the Query Designer in Reporting Services, this again is coming from a query in Analysis Services, and I've basically expanded this date hierarchy. So you can see the different dates in the hierarchy, but also you can see that there are measures in the cube, different dimensions, additionally KPIs. So again, it's a very similar design interface for people to see these data sets, and this is a similar drag and drop. The difference here is that Reporting Services has some limitations in terms of how you can lay out your reports. So frequently you have to end up customizing the query. Now, one of the main differences in analysis services is that it is a completely different technology from SQL Server. It comes with SQL Server, it's on the same media, but it is a completely different service. It's actually technically a different license. So if you build a solution that's scaled out and you have reporting services on a web server, and you have the analysis services cube on one server, and then you finally have SQL Server on another server, that is technically 3 licenses of SQL Server. So you have to pay for 3 licenses. Now you could put everything on one box, but that'd have to be a pretty big box, or a fairly small user base to support all that. Okay? But analysis services doesn't use SQL. It uses a technology called MDX. It stands for multidimensional expression. MDX is the language of analysis services, just like SQL is the language of SQL Server. So frequently what you have to end up doing when you're creating reports against analysis services, as well as when you're building these cubes in analysis services designer, you have to write a lot of MDX to create the customizations you need. So that is a different skill set. And I will tell you that it sort of looks like SQL. There is, there's kind of a select from with group by sort of methodology or sort of structure, but it's completely different. All the methods are different, all the functions are different. It has a completely different way of kind of structuring your data. That's not to say it's not something you can achieve and do, but it is a completely different technology. So if you are being asked, or someone, maybe your director or your division head has come to you and said, hey, I want to create an easier way for my users to get access to this data. I want them to kind of do more self-service reporting on their own. And you say, yeah, I was at this conference and this guy talked about this technology called cubes. Maybe we should look into it. This is probably a few months to kind of even build a prototype, because it's just something that's fairly different from, even if you're a DBA, it's different than what you're used to. That's not to say you can't solve it, I'm sure, but it is different. Okay, I'll just say that up front. That being said, there's a lot of great tutorials that Microsoft provides to do this. One of the ones that I would tell you is the classic AdventureWorks that everybody and their brother uses for a kind of demo set for SQL Server is actually exceptional for analysis services. They really went and they integrated a lot of different design issues and data sets and hierarchies, and they really put a lot into the sample of AdventureWorks. So that would really be the first place that I'd start. If you really want to learn kind of your own self-tutorial about this, they actually have one online for even up to 2012. I don't think they've released the 2012 R2 one yet, but it's a great tutorial, so just FYI. Finally then, these are some samples of screenshots of the reporting services reports themselves. This is just a web page. These are just reports that have been developed and deployed by a developer, and you can see this dashboard. The main difference between reporting services and Excel is frequently the developer of the Excel report is oftentimes the consumer. That's really kind of what it boils down to. Self-service reporting is really significantly easier in Excel, and that's really the tool that Microsoft is kind of encouraging people to use for self-service reporting and data analysis. Reporting service is really more the traditional: a consumer makes a request, IT developer builds it, gives a version back out to the consumer. What does it look like? Is this right? Makes a couple of revisions, and then they deploy it to production, and that's what they get. Now, one thing that's not that isn't on these set of reports, but is available, is that reporting services has all the same type of parameters and drop downs that you can build into these online reports. So you can have the same report support many people because it's parameter driven or it's attribute based, that kind of thing. And again, that's also in Excel as well. Okay, so this is again, reporting services is a more traditional reporting environment that people can use. Okay. Finally, reporting services itself actually operates in two modes. This version is called native SQL Server Reporting Services. It is a standalone website. It's its own interface. The web service runs and it strictly supports reporting services. This is called SharePoint Integrated Reporting Services. So a lot of people use SharePoint as their portal environment. So SQL Server reports can be deployed and integrated. Hi. Oh, sorry. They can be reported and integrated into your reports.